The smell of fried onions and detergent filled the small apartment in south-central Los Angeles. Evening light slipped through the blinds, striping the walls with gold and shadow. Mara Jenkins, 65, stood by the kitchen sink with her sleeves rolled up, the hot water steaming against her skin. Her hands, broad, dark, and rough from decades of cleaning other people's homes, moved mechanically. Plate, rinse, dry, repeat. On the counter, her phone vibrated again. She didn't look. She already knew the name glowing on the cracked screen, Darren. For 2 weeks, she had avoided that call, pretending not to see the messages. "Mom, we need to talk." She didn't need to hear the voice of a man she no longer recognized as her son. Outside, the city was buzzing, the hum of traffic, the laughter of teenagers, the low thump of distant music. Inside her apartment, only the rhythmic sound of water filled the silence. When the call stopped, she finally turned off the tap, wiped her hands, and leaned against the counter. Her back ached, her knees popped like dry twigs. But it wasn't age that bent her, it was disappointment. She had spent her whole life carrying a weight that never lightened. On the small dining table lay a stack of unpaid bills, an empty coffee mug, and a red leather notebook. She had bought that notebook years ago at a thrift store, intending to use it for grocery lists. Instead, it had become a confession, book pages of thoughts she couldn't say aloud. She flipped it open. On the most recent page, her handwriting trembled slightly. "When you raise a child alone, you learn to fight wars without soldiers, and love without guarantees." The phone buzzed again. This time, she answered Mom. Finally, Darren's voice spilled out, high and anxious. "I've been calling you for days." "I know," she said flatly, drying her hands with a towel. "I've been busy." "Busy? Doing what?" "You're retired. I'm not retired, Darren. I'm unemployed. There's a difference." A pause. He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "Mom, look, I just need a little help, just for a few weeks. I got an opportunity here in Miami, but I'm short on cash." Mara closed her eyes. She could almost see his face, 35, smooth-talking, with that same charming smile that once melted her heart. The same smile he'd used to convince her to sign the joint account, to help him build credit. "How much this time?" she asked quietly. "Only 5,000. I'll pay it back, I promise." 5,000. Her voice cracked. "You already took 3 last month. That was for rent. This is for look. It's complicated. It's business." Mara looked around her small apartment. The peeling paint, the flickering ceiling light, the ancient fridge humming like an old man snoring. $5,000 wasn't a loan, it was survival money. "I don't have it," she said simply. "Mom, don't lie. I saw the balance last time we checked the account." Her heart clenched. "You saw my balance because it's my savings, Darren. Every cent of that came from my hands, my back, my time. Mom, please," he pleaded. "You said you'd always be there for me." "I was," she said, voice trembling, "until you stopped being there for yourself." Silence stretched. He cursed under his breath. "You know what? Fine. You never believed in me anyway." And then the line went dead. Mara stood frozen, the phone still in her hand. Her reflection on the dark window stared background face, soft eyes hardened by years of single motherhood. She whispered to no one, "I believed in you too much." She sank into her chair, her chest heavy, her mind drifting back to when Darren was still a boy. A memory surfaced, him running into her arms with a scraped knee, crying until she kissed it better. Back then, he thought she could fix anything, but there were things a mother couldn't fix, especially the kind that grew inside a man's heart. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the table under the yellow bulb, flipping through the red notebook. Every page was a reminder of sacrifices, extra shifts at the hotel, late bus rides home, dinners skipped so her son could eat better. Near midnight, she began to write. "Dear Darren, I don't know what happened to the boy I raised, the one who used to hug me just to hear my heartbeat. Maybe he's still there, hiding behind pride and money. I gave you everything I had, and things I didn't. I don't regret it. But love without boundaries becomes chains, and I can't live chained to your mistakes anymore. I won't save you this time, son. You'll have to learn what survival means when no one picks up the phone. Because sometimes pain teaches what comfort never can." She stopped, breathing deeply. Her chest ached, but her mind felt clear. For the first time, she wasn't writing as a mother. She was writing as a woman, reclaiming her peace. Morning came gray and silent. The street vendors were setting up outside, and somewhere a child was laughing. Mara opened her curtains, letting in the light. Her kitchen looked smaller in daylight. but her heart felt bigger. She poured herself a cup of instant coffee, took a sip, and smiled faintly at the bitter taste. Then her phone buzzed again this time. It wasn't Darren, it was Walter, her old neighbor and friend, a retired lawyer who lived across the hall. "Morning, Mara," he said when she answered. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't. Long night." "You finally told him no." She smiled weakly. "You heard. Walls in this building got ears, you know," he chuckled. Then, after a pause, his voice softened. "You did the right thing. Feels like hell. Sometimes hell's the first step to heaven," he said. "You taught him all his life. Maybe now it's time for life to do the teaching." Mara stared at her coffee. "He's my son, Walt, and you're his mother, not his wallet." His words hit hard but true. That afternoon, she took the bus downtown to visit her doctor. For months, she had ignored the tightness in her chest and the fatigue that clung to her bones. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and fear. When her name was called, she followed the nurse in silence. The doctor was kind, too kind, the kind that made bad news sound like mercy. "Mara, your tests came back. It's cancer, advanced stage." The word echoed in her mind like a bell tolling in an empty church. She didn't cry, she just nodded. "How long?" she asked. "With treatment, maybe a year." Without, she inhaled slowly. "Then, I guess I should start packing." The doctor frowned. "Don't give up so soon." "I'm not giving up," she said. "I'm just tired of fighting battles alone." On the bus ride home, the city blurred past. The window murals of saints and sinners, kids with backpacks, men on corners smoking dreams. Life moved on, uncaring. Mara clutched her red notebook close to her chest, as if it contained all the reasons she'd lived. That night, she opened her old photo box. There was Darren at age 6, holding a toy truck with missing wheels. There, he was at his graduation, tall and proud, his cap tilted sideways as she clapped from the bleachers. She touched the photos gently, her fingers trembling. "Where did I lose you?" she whispered. And then she knew it wasn't in the moment he lied, or when he took her money. It was long before, in the quiet space where love turned into dependence. She sat down again at her desk, wrote a new line in her notebook. Sometimes a mother's biggest mistake is thinking she can protect her child from himself. When she closed the book, she felt lighter. Not happy, not yet, but freer. She walked to the mirror, removed her headscarf, and stared at the thinning patches of gray hair. She picked up the small scissors from the drawer. One lock fell, then another. Within minutes, her head was bare. She looked at herself. No makeup, no disguise, no mask. "Now," she whispered, "I look like who I really am." That night, she placed the red notebook beside her bed, turned off the light, and listened to the city breathe outside her window. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere, laughter echoed. Somewhere, her son was making another mistake. But for the first time in years, Mara Jenkins didn't chase after him. She just lay there, eyes open in the dark, and let the silence wrap around her like a blanket not of loneliness, but of peace. Miami heat was a liar. It looked like paradise from the outside sunlight beaches. Women in bright dresses, but beneath the glitter was sweat, debt, and desperation. Darren Jenkins, 35, walked along Biscayne Boulevard with his phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, I'm working on it," he lied to his business partner. "The investors just want to see some numbers." The truth, there were no investors. There were no numbers. There wasn't even a business anymore. His opportunity had been a slick-talking friend who promised easy money flipping cars. 1 week later, the friend disappeared with the cash, half of it from Darren, half borrowed from people he shouldn't have borrowed from. Now, bills piled up like bad memories. His apartment lease was overdue, his car repoed, and his phone battery dying fast. Every problem he faced was a ghost with his name on it. He stopped at a food truck and ordered coffee he couldn't afford. The Cuban vendor handed it to him without a smile. Darren drank slowly, trying to pretend everything was fine, but the fear never left. At night, when he closed his eyes, he saw his mother's face, not the angry one from their last call, but the tired one, the one that used to wait up for him on the couch when he was 16 and missed curfew. Her eyes had always said, "I forgive you." Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure she would. He tried to call her again that night. The line rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. "Hey Mom, it's me. I know you're mad, but I need to talk to you. Please call me back." He hung up, and the silence afterward was louder than any argument they'd ever had. 3 days later, Darren's landlord knocked. You got 2 days to clear out, man, the old Cuban said, eyes soft but firm. No more extensions. Darren nodded, pretending he had a plan. He didn't. He spent that night at a 24-hour laundromat, pretending to be waiting for clothes that didn't exist. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, and the city smelled like salt and rain. He scrolled through his phone. No new messages. He clicked on Mom again, thumb hovering over the call button. But shame is heavier than love. He turned off the phone instead. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Mara Jenkins was learning how to live slowly. After her diagnosis, she didn't tell anyone except Walter. She didn't want pity. She wanted time to think, to breathe, to make peace. She spent her mornings tending to a small balcony garden, where stubborn succulents grew from cracked pots. She had planted them years ago, thinking they'd die in the city smog, but they had survived. Somehow that felt like a message. Walter often dropped by with groceries or jokes, trying to keep her spirits up. You need to eat more than air and caffeine, he'd say. Unloading oranges and cans of soup. I'll eat when I'm hungry, she'd reply, smiling. They had that kind of friendship, comfortable silence, shared loneliness. One afternoon, Walter found her sitting on the balcony, reading her red notebook again. You still writing? He asked. Trying to, she said, but lately, words come out slower. Maybe that's not bad, he said. Slower means you're feeling them. She looked up, her eyes tired but calm. You ever think love is a kind of addiction? Walter laughed softly. Sure. Only difference is, you can't check into rehab for it. They both smiled, and the air between them felt lighter for a moment. That night, as Mara wrote, her hands trembled slightly. The medication made her weak, but her mind stayed sharp. Love doesn't die when a child forgets you, she wrote. It just changes, shape becomes quieter, heavier, like a shadow that follows you even when the light is gone. She stopped, wiped a tear she didn't know had fallen, and looked at her phone again. No messages. She refused to call first. This time, she wouldn't chase him, but she couldn't stop thinking about him either. She went to bed early, but her dreams were restless. Her son, younger again, running through the rain, calling for her. She woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, whispering his name. Darren. In Miami, the rain finally came, heavy, relentless, cleansing. Darren sat under a gas station awning, drenched and shaking, watching people rush to their cars. He had $27 left and nowhere to sleep. When his phone buzzed, he snatched it up. A known number. Mr. Jenkins. A cold voice said, "This is Officer Martinez with Miami-Dade PD. We've recovered a vehicle registered under your name. It was used in a fraudulent sale. We'll need you to come in for questioning." Darren's stomach twisted. His business partner had used his name on the deal. Another mess, another lie catching up. He hung up, pressed his hands to his face, and laughed a bitter, hollow laugh. "Congratulations, Darren," he whispered. "You've officially become your own worst nightmare." The rain kept falling. A woman at the bus stop glanced at him, pity in her eyes. He turned away. 2 weeks passed. No money, no home, no mother's voice. He finally swallowed his pride and called again, straight to voicemail. He called Walter instead, the only number his mother had mentioned once, years ago. "Hello, this is Darren. I'm Mara's son." There was a pause. "Darren," Walter said slowly, "I've been meaning to reach you. She's not doing so good." The words hit harder than any punch. "What do you mean? What happened?" "She's sick, cancer. She didn't want to tell you." Darren's throat closed. The rain outside seemed to vanish, replaced by the roaring in his ears. "How long? How bad?" "She's still fighting," Walter said. "But she needs peace, not worry. You understand?" Darren's voice broke. "Yeah, I understand." After they hung up, he sat in silence for a long time, staring at the cracked screen, his reflection ghosting back at him. His mother was dying, and all he'd given her was pain. He bought a one-way bus ticket to Los Angeles with the last of his money. The ride took 2 days. He barely slept, haunted by memories of her laughter, her humming gospel songs on Sunday mornings, her scolding when he lied, her hugs that made the world small and safe. Every mile between Miami and LA felt like a lifetime of regret. When he finally arrived, he didn't go straight to her building. He stood across the street for nearly an hour, watching the light in her window flicker. He felt like a thief outside his own home. Finally, he went up and knocked. Mara opened the door slowly, wearing a headscarf and an oversized sweater. Her eyes widened, part shock, part something deeper. "Darren," she whispered. He nodded, voice small. "Hey, Mom." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, without a word, she stepped aside and let him in. The apartment smelled the same lavender detergent and fried onions, the same smell from his childhood. He wanted to say something, anything, but words stuck in his throat. "You look tired," she said finally. "So do you." They both laughed weakly, and that small sound broke the ice. He sat on the couch, rubbing his palms together. "Walt told me about the cancer." Mara's face didn't change. "He talks too much. You should have told me." "Why?" "So you could worry. I've been doing that for both of us long enough." He lowered his head. "I know I've been a mess." "That's an understatement," she said softly. Silence fell again. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Darren whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long time, the man who used to be her little boy. "Sorry doesn't fix what's broken," she said gently, "but it's a start." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I'll do better, I swear." "I hope so," she said, "because I don't have much time left to watch you try." Her words weren't cruel, they were honest, stripped of everything but truth, and that truth hit deeper than any punishment. That night, Darren stayed on the couch. He couldn't sleep. He kept glancing at her bedroom door, listening to her soft coughs. Every sound felt like a countdown at dawn. He walked into the kitchen and started making breakfast eggs, toast, and coffee, just like she used to make for him. When she woke up, the smell filled the apartment. She smiled weakly. "You cooking now?" "Trying," he said. "Don't die before you taste it." She laughed, a real, gentle laugh that sounded like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Smart mouth," she said. "You get that from me." For the first time in years, they sat together at the table and ate in silence, not as strangers or enemies, but as two souls finding their way back to each other. Mara had always believed that silence was a choice, a sacred space where one could find peace. But lately, silence felt like punishment. The walls of her small apartment seemed to absorb every sigh, every unspoken word. The framed photo of Darren on his graduation day sat on the mantel. Its glass cracked from the time she had dropped it by accident. His smile, so confident, so full of life, felt like a lie now. Every morning, she woke up to the sound of her own coughing. The disease had begun its slow march through her body, one breath at a time. The doctors had confirmed what she already suspected. Chemotherapy might buy her time, but not much. When she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, the woman staring back at her was barely recognizable. Her once full cheeks had hollowed, and her curls were thinning, revealing patches of tender scalp. Yet, in her eyes, there was still fire. "Not yet," she whispered to herself one morning. "Not before I see him again." It had been almost a year since Darren left for Europe. Their last conversation still echoed in her mind, the shouting, the slammed door, the sound of his car speeding away. He had promised to call, to write, to visit. He hadn't done any of those things. What she did receive, however, were notices from the bank. Debts she didn't know existed, withdrawals from joint accounts she had trusted him with. Her son, her pride, had taken more than her savings. He had taken her belief that love could save someone. Walter visited every other day. He brought groceries, helped with the bills, and made sure Mara didn't collapse from exhaustion. He was gentle but direct, the kind of man who said difficult things with compassion. "You need to face what he's done, Mara," he told her one afternoon, while helping her fix a leaking faucet. "You can't carry his sins on your shoulders." She sighed, her hands trembling slightly. "He's still my boy, Walter. I carried him before he carried himself. Maybe I made it too easy for him to forget who he was." Walter dried his hands and looked at her with tired eyes. "You didn't make it easy. You made it possible. There's a difference." Mara smiled faintly. "Then why does it hurt so much?" "Because love doesn't end where disappointment begins." That night, she couldn't sleep. The air was heavy, thick with memory. She went to her dresser, opened the top drawer, and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with handwriting recipes, prayers, and notes to herself. On the last blank page, she wrote, "If my silence reaches you, let it not be a wall, but a mirror. May you see not what you've done, but who you've become." She closed the notebook, tears staining the paper before they could dry. Meanwhile, in London, Darren was running out of both money and excuses. Tanya had grown distant, her affection replaced by impatience. Her beauty had become a weapon, and her words were sharper than ever. "You're broke," she said one night, tossing a stack of unpaid bills on the table. "Do you think I'm going to live like this? I didn't sign up for charity." Darren rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing down on him. Tanya, I'm trying to fix it. Just give me time. Time, she scoffed. You already wasted all of mine. When she slammed the door behind her, Darren didn't follow. He didn't even move. He just sat there, staring at the bills, the empty wine bottles, the life that had rotted from the inside out. For the first time, he thought about his mother not as a safety net, but as a human being. He remembered the sound of her laughter when he was little, the smell of fried chicken on Sundays, the way she kissed his forehead when he pretended to sleep. He hadn't realized how much of her love he had taken for granted until it was gone. He opened his phone and scrolled through old messages. The last one from her was dated 11 months ago. Call me when you can. I made your favorite mac and cheese with bacon. He had never replied. In the following days, Mara began selling small things from her house, the coffee table, a few of her late husband's tools, even her pearl earrings. Walter noticed the changes but didn't question them until one morning when he found her sitting on the floor surrounded by open boxes. What are you doing? He asked gently. Making space, she said without looking up. There's too much weight in this house. For what? He pressed. For peace, she whispered. He didn't argue. He simply sat beside her and started folding old clothes. When he found a small photo of Mara and Darren at the beach, he held it up. Keep this one, he said softly. But Mara hesitated. Maybe, maybe not. A week later, she visited the doctor again. The results were worse than before. The cancer had spread to her lung. The doctor spoke carefully, his tone professional but sympathetic. Mara, we can extend treatment, but you should prepare yourself. She nodded slowly, her expression calm. I have been, doctor, for a while now. When she left the clinic, the sky was gray, the city buzzing with life as if mocking her stillness. She walked home slowly, her hand pressed against her chest where the pain pulsed like a second heartbeat. That night, she made tea and sat by the window. The city lights flickered like distant stars. She whispered to herself, he'll come back when he's ready. Then, after a pause, she added, or when it's too late. Across the ocean, Darren's life was unraveling. His landlord had given him notice. His credit cards were frozen. Even Tanya's friends had started avoiding him. The illusion of glamour had shattered, leaving behind nothing but regret and fear. He called his mother's number once. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He didn't know what to say. He didn't deserve her voice. That night, he dreamed of her. In the dream, she was sitting in her rocking chair, humming softly. The light around her was warm, almost golden. When she looked at him, her eyes were kind, but her voice was firm. Some lessons, son, can't be taught with comfort. He woke up crying. Mara's strength faded, but her resolve did not. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror and picked up a pair of scissors. Her reflection stared back, fragile yet fearless. With one deliberate motion, she began cutting her hair. Each lock that fell into the sink felt like shedding an old version of herself, one who waited, one who begged, one who suffered in silence. When Walter saw her later that day, he froze. You look different. I finally look like who I am, she replied, smiling faintly. That night, she wrote a letter. It began simply, My dearest Darren, if you're reading this, it means you finally stopped running. She didn't finish it yet. She wasn't ready, not because she didn't have the words, but because the words had to matter. At the same time, Darren received an email from an old friend in the US. Your mother's been sick, it said. People are talking. You should go home. He stared at the screen for a long time, his chest tightening. Then, without hesitation, he booked a one-way ticket. He didn't know if she would see him. He didn't know if she would forgive him. But for the first time in years, he wanted to try. The flight home was quiet. Darren sat by the window, staring at the endless clouds below, feeling as if the miles stretched not just across the Atlantic, but across time and mistakes. His passport felt heavier in his pocket than it ever had, weighed down not by stamps or visas, but by guilt and anticipation. He hadn't slept well on the plane. Every announcement, every turn of the cabin, made his stomach twist. He remembered the last time he had left Europe, had felt like a promise of freedom, a chance to escape his mother's rules, her eyes, her expectations. He had been wrong. The freedom had been an illusion, and the cost had been unimaginable. Meanwhile, Mara had prepared. Her apartment was quiet, the air carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the small potted plants she had nurtured. Walter had helped her organize her medication, and Brenda, the neighbor who had grown into something like family, had stocked the fridge with soup and fruit. But Mara didn't need comfort. She needed resolution. She had placed the yellow envelope carefully on the table by her rocking chair. Inside were photos from Darren's childhood. First steps, first lost tooth, first letter to Santa. Alongside the photographs was a letter she had begun but hadn't sent. It was her testament, her heart poured onto paper, the words written with both love and sorrow. She had shaved her hair earlier that week. The act had been symbolic, a reclaiming of herself before the inevitable. In the mirror, the reflection of her bald head and strong shoulders was a reminder. She had survived every storm life had thrown at her, and she would meet this one with the same courage. The airport in Los Angeles was gray, overcast, and unwelcoming. Darren's plane landed, and he shuffled off, carrying only a small bag with a few essentials. He avoided eye contact with the crowd, his sneakers dragging on the cold tiles. The economic watch list, imposed by the embassy, meant that every step he took was recorded, every movement scrutinized. Darren knew he couldn't escape responsibility anymore. The life he had built on lies, deceit, and borrowed trust had crumbled. Tanya hadn't called. She hadn't even sent a message. The truth of his isolation hit him harder than any threat of arrest. For the first time, he felt small, not the powerful, charming figure he had once been, but just a boy who had failed, the only person who had ever truly loved him unconditionally. Walter had arranged everything. He met Mara at the airport early, ensuring she would be present when Darren arrived. They didn't speak much in the car. Walter kept his hands folded on his lap, respecting the space Mara had claimed for herself. "You're ready," he said finally, breaking the silence. Mara nodded. "I've been ready for a long time." When they arrived at her neighborhood, Mara saw the familiar streets with a detached gaze. South Central hadn't changed much. The graffiti, the potholes, the smell of fried food and exhaust mingled into the same comforting mess. She felt no fear. This was her city, her life, her domain. Walter parked, and they walked silently to her building. Mara carried the yellow envelope tucked securely under her arm. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from her body, but from the weight of what was about to happen. Darren, on the other hand, had taken a taxi to a nearby hotel. He didn't know if Mara would want to see him. He didn't know if she would recognize him through the years of neglect, through the walls he had built between them. He rehearsed what he might say, but every phrase felt hollow. What words could possibly undo what he had done? The thought of the yellow envelope, the photos, the memories, the letter haunted him. He had no right to it, yet somehow, he yearned to hold it, to feel the connection he had severed with his own hands. At the hotel, Darren tried to rest, but the room felt oppressive. He stared at the ceiling, imagining Mara in her rocking chair, her eyes sharp but forgiving. He tried to remember her voice, the rhythm of her words, the way she had kissed his forehead when he was a boy pretending to sleep. Every memory was a knife and a balm, at once painful, yet healing in its impossibility. When morning came, he dressed carefully, not for Tanya, not for the embassy, but for Mara. He left the hotel quietly, taking the subway like any ordinary man. Each step toward home felt like walking through his own shame, the cityscape around him blurring into insignificance. Mara waited in her apartment, sitting in the rocking chair, hands folded in her lap. She sensed his presence before she saw him, the familiar tension of his energy, the mix of fear and longing that had marked him since childhood. She didn't stand. She didn't reach out. She simply waited. When Darren arrived at the building, he saw her from across the street. She was smaller than he remembered, her frame softened by age and illness, but there was a dignity in the way she sat, a quiet strength that had always been hers. Even when he had failed to notice it, he wanted to run to her, to beg, to apologize, to make everything right, but he couldn't. He stopped, placing a small bag of pastries on the porch instead. The gesture was silent, humble, and he walked away, waiting to see if she noticed. Mara had felt him. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him aloud. She simply nodded in her mind. The envelope remained on the table, a bridge across the years, a reminder that love and truth could coexist even in silence. Walter watched, saying nothing. He understood that this moment was Mara's alone, her final act of patience and witness. Some lessons, he knew, could only be taught through observation, through letting the other person confront their own soul. Days passed. Darren returned daily, leaving small offerings, flowers, notes, a pastry here and there. He never knocked, he never intruded. He understood that this was not about his desire, but about her boundaries. Every gesture was an unspoken plea, every act a quiet attempt at redemption. Inside her apartment, Mara continued her life. She wrote, she cooked, she listened to blues records, she watched the children play outside. Each day, she reminded herself that love is not demanded, it is given. And perhaps, when Darren was ready, he would understand that. One evening, Mara opened her red notebook and wrote her final note. My son, love is not demanded, it is given. And if you have learned that, then you are not lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone. I will be in every mistake you choose not to repeat, in every act of kindness you do without expecting anything in return. If you want to forgive yourself, start with others. And if you ever manage to see your mother in the eyes of another woman, don't fail her. That will be my redemption. She signed it with her full name, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope labeled for Darren. Meanwhile, Darren held the small photos Mara had left him, yellowed, faded, but intact. He knelt on the floor and cried, not from punishment, but from the weight of realization. He had lost something he could never reclaim, the dignity of a mother's unwavering love. And in that loss, he began to understand the meaning of accountability, humility, and redemption. The chapter closes on a quiet, tension-filled note. Darren sitting across the street, watching Mara in her rocking chair, the envelope in his hand, the air thick with unspoken words. Somewhere, in the silence, the first seeds of reconciliation begin to take root, not in grand gestures, but in patient observation, in the humility of a man who finally understands the cost of neglect and the power of forgiveness. The narrow streets smelled of wet asphalt and roasted coffee beans. As Darren approached the familiar building, he had left his bag of donuts at the doorstep once more, but this time, something inside him urged him forward. His feet hesitated at the threshold. Every memory of Mara, the soft clatter of her dishes, the scent of jasmine from her tiny balcony, the rocking chair creaking under her weight, pushed and pulled at him in equal measure. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it, then raised it again. In that moment, he realized it was not he who had the right to ask, it was she who had the authority to welcome or deny him. The door opened before he could decide. Mara stood there, framed by the afternoon light filtering through the stained glass. Her gray sweater hung loosely on her frame, a long skirt brushed the floor, and a dark blue scarf draped over her shoulders. Her bald head was partially covered by a black bandana, but her eyes, sharp, steady, and unwavering, were fully exposed. You came, she said softly. Her voice carried neither accusation nor warmth, only clarity. I wanted to see you, Darren stammered, feeling suddenly smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Mara held up a hand. Stop. You are here not to speak, but to witness. Witness. The word struck him like a hammer. All those years, she had watched him, nurtured him, corrected him, suffered for him. And now, at last, the roles were reversed. Darren understood, with every fiber of his being, that this was no longer about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about facing truth. Inside the modest apartment, Mara led him to the living room. The furniture was simple, worn, yet orderly. On the table lay the yellow envelope, unmistakable in its quiet presence. It wasn't just an envelope, it was a time capsule, a mirror of all the love, patience, and sacrifice she had invested in a son who had lost his way. Darren swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knelt slightly, as if approaching a sacred relic. Mara did not hand it to him. She did not need to. The presence of the envelope alone spoke volumes. You know why this is here, she said. Not to save you, not to excuse you, but so that when you look back, you cannot claim ignorance. Darren nodded, words failing him. He remembered the countless nights abroad, hiding from responsibility, pretending to be free. He remembered Tanya's manipulations, the empty luxury, the hollow laughter. And now, staring at the envelope, he realized the truth. He had spent decades running from the one person whose love had been unconditional, whose guidance had been unwavering. With trembling hands, he picked up the envelope. The weight of it was heavier than he expected, not because of paper and photographs, but because it contained every moment of care he had squandered, every choice he had made that betrayed her trust. Inside, the photos were yellowed, faded, yet intact. The first steps he had taken as a toddler, the tiny hands clutching crayons. The letter to Santa Claus, written with messy blue ink, a very artifact, was a fragment of a childhood he had abandoned. And then, finally, the letter, written in Mara's familiar, careful hand. My son, you were my reason for rising each morning. You were my pride, my strength, my joy. I gave you all I had, and even what I did not have. I denied myself sleep, food, companionship for you, and I regret nothing. I did it with love, but you forgot who you were. You surrounded yourself with ghosts in expensive perfume. And in their eagerness to consume me alive, they forced me to awaken. I do not hate you, but I am no longer the woman who waits silently for you to remember me. I am now the one who teaches, even if it hurts. And if you ever truly repent, this letter will be here not to save you, but so you cannot say, no one warned you. Darren read the letter aloud, his voice quivering. Tears streamed down his face, but not in self-pity, not in anger, only grief and shame. Grief for the years lost, shame for the moments he had taken for granted. Mara watched silently. Her eyes glistened, but she did not flinch. She had endured his absence, his betrayals, his mistakes. She had waited, not for vengeance, but for understanding. And now, finally, he understood. The silence stretched. Then Darren spoke, voice breaking. Mom, I don't know where to start. I've failed you in every way. Mara lifted a hand again. No, this is not about starting over with words. It's about understanding, witness, remember, and live differently. Every action from now on is your own. You cannot undo the past, but you can let it teach you. He nodded, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. The weight in his hands was nothing compared to the weight in his heart, the heavy, searing knowledge of all he had lost. Yet for the first time, it was accompanied by clarity, by accountability, by the faint glimmer of redemption. He looked at her, truly looked. He saw not a frail old woman, but a force of nature, a pillar of strength, who had endured what no one should have to endure. He saw himself reflected in her eyes, not the boy he once was, but the man he could still become. Mara gestured to the rocking chair beside her. Sit, but do not speak yet. Observe, learn, reflect. Darren obeyed. He sank into the worn cushions, the chair groaning under his weight. He felt the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the faint scratch of the pen she had left on the table, the quiet presence of someone who had loved him completely without requiring repayment. For hours, they remained in silence. The city outside hummed with life, but inside, time had collapsed. Past, present, and future coexisted in that small apartment. Memories intertwined with reality. The letter, the photos, the small details of her care, they all spoke louder than words ever could. Finally, Mara broke the silence. You will leave soon, and when you do, you will carry what you have seen, what you have touched, what you have held in your hands. This is your inheritance. Not money, not material wealth, but the truth. You can spend the rest of your life chasing redemption, or you can begin living it now. Darren nodded again. He didn't know if he could ever repay her, but he understood, finally, that repayment wasn't required. Understanding, accountability, and the quiet practice of love that was enough. He rose slowly, placing the envelope carefully back on the table. He looked at Mara, feeling a weight lift, just slightly. For the first time, he saw the boundaries between them not as walls, but as lessons of love, of dignity, of respect, and of responsibility. She gave him a faint smile, almost imperceptible. Go, she said. Live with this. Make it count for something. And if you cannot forgive yourself yet, start by forgiving others. Darren left the apartment. The city felt different. The gray streets of South Central were the same, yet somehow brighter. Every crack in the pavement, every child playing outside, every graffiti-tagged wall seemed to echo the lessons he had finally internalized. He carried the envelope, not as a burden, but as a testament, and for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope, not for himself alone, but for the legacy of love he had nearly destroyed. That night, Darren sat on the stoop outside Mara's apartment, holding the yellow envelope on his lap. He traced the photos with his fingers, the lines of the letter etched into his memory. The lessons were clear now. Love is a gift. Accountability is heavy but essential, and redemption begins with witness, reflection, and action. And somewhere in the distance, the faint creak of a rocking chair reminded him that his mother had lived on, taught with dignity, until the very end. The streets of South Central felt strangely quiet as Darren walked back toward the heart of the neighborhood. His steps were heavy, weighted by the knowledge he carried. Yet each footfall was purposeful. The yellow envelope under his arm felt less like a burden now, and more like a compass, a guide for how he might navigate the wreckage of his own life. For years, he had wandered through the world with a kind of numbness, chasing illusions of success while abandoning the only person who had ever believed in him completely. Now, every corner of the neighborhood, the cracked sidewalks, the faded murals, the vendors selling grilled corn was a reflection, a reminder of what he had almost lost. Roots, family, history, and dignity. Back at Mara's apartment, she watched him from her window for a few moments before retreating into the warmth of her small living room. The rocking chair sat empty, the yellow envelope resting on the table, and Mara finally allowed herself a sigh. The tension that had gripped her since his arrival eased slightly. She knew that he had begun to understand. That comprehension was a first, tentative step on the long road of redemption. She had lived decades of quiet labor raising a son, supporting her family, and maintaining dignity in a world that often refused to honor it. And now, in the twilight of her years, she had the satisfaction of seeing that her lessons had begun to penetrate the defenses Darren had built around himself. Meanwhile, Darren began a routine. He started small, almost imperceptibly. He picked up litter from the streets, helped the elderly carry groceries, and offered spare change to children selling handmade crafts. At first, these actions were mechanical, performed out of obligation rather than genuine empathy. But slowly, authenticity began to seep in. Each small act of kindness became a quiet confrontation with his own past. Every gesture was a conversation with Mara's legacy, a way of proving to himself that he could act with honor without seeking praise. He also began documenting his days. A small journal became his companion, where he recorded reflections, mistakes, and tiny victories. The pages filled with honesty, the kind of honesty he had never afforded himself. Mara's words echoed constantly in his mind. Redemption begins with witness, reflection, and action. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Darren found himself standing in front of a mural painted decades ago on the side of a local community center. The painting depicted a mother and child, their hands intertwined, gazing toward a sun that bathed the world in gold. He knelt down and ran his fingers over the cracked paint. Memories flooded back, Mara tucking him into bed, her soft voice reading stories, the aroma of her cooking. Tears sprang to his eyes, not tears of despair, but of reverence and gratitude. In that moment, he made a silent vow. He would live in a way that honored the sacrifices she had made, the dignity she had maintained, and the lessons she had painstakingly imparted. He would not squander what remained of her legacy. Darren also began to reconnect with Mara's neighbors. Brenda, who had faithfully prepared soups for Mara, offered him gentle guidance. "You're here now," she said. "That's the first step. Don't rush it. Every small action matters." Walter, Mara's longtime friend and legal ally, provided a steadying presence, sharing stories of Mara's unwavering principles and reminding Darren that transformation was a process, not an event. Through these interactions, Darren started to understand that redemption was not a solitary journey. It was communal, relational, and intertwined with the lives of others. His own shame, though personal, had consequences for the entire community, and the path to atonement required not only internal change but also the repair of external relationships. As the weeks passed, Darren's life began to take shape in ways he hadn't anticipated. He volunteered at the local library, helping children with homework and reading sessions. He joined Mara's favorite blues music club, not to impress anyone, but to reconnect with the small joys she had cherished. Each act, no matter how insignificant it seemed, was a brick in the fragile edifice of his rehabilitation. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection. The yellow envelope remained close, a touchstone. He read Mara's letter repeatedly, internalizing its guidance. Love is given, not demanded. Forgiveness begins with understanding. Redemption is action, not words. These lessons became his mantra, a framework for living with purpose rather than indulgence. However, the journey was not without its setbacks. Darren frequently confronted old impulses, selfishness, defensiveness, and the desire to flee from responsibility. Nights were the hardest, when memories of Mara's disappointment haunted him most vividly. But even in these moments, he remembered the envelope, the photos, and the letter. He forced himself to sit with discomfort, to confront rather than evade. One rainy afternoon, he stumbled upon a group of local teens vandalizing a vacant lot. His first instinct was to turn away, to preserve his own comfort. But he paused, recalling Mara's lessons of accountability and action. Instead of ignoring them, he approached calmly, speaking with authority, tempered by patience. He guided them to clean the space, painting over the graffiti and planting small flowers. By the time the rain ceased, the lot had transformed, not completely, but enough to make a statement. Darren felt a flicker of pride, not for himself, but for the impact he could have when he acted with integrity. The community began to notice subtle changes in him. Children who had once avoided him approached cautiously, then with increasing familiarity. Neighbors greeted him with tentative smiles, sensing that the man who had once been lost was trying, in his own awkward way, to make amends. The yellow envelope had transformed from a symbol of his guilt to a beacon of his potential, guiding him toward meaningful engagement with the world Mara had left behind. And yet, every action was underpinned by an awareness of fragility. Mara's presence was absent in body but omnipresent in spirit. Darren understood that he was living under the weight of her memory, striving to honor her with every decision, every conversation, every act of kindness. Redemption, he realized, was not a destination, it was a practice, sustained daily, quietly, and with humility. One evening, Darren returned to Mara's apartment, leaving a small bouquet of wildflowers on the doorstep. He did not knock. He did not wait for acknowledgement. He left the flowers, a silent testament to the ongoing transformation in his life. As he walked away, he felt something shift inside, a lightness, a clarity, a sense that he was, at last, beginning to inhabit the man Mara had always believed he could be. In the weeks that followed, Darren continued this pattern. Each day became a deliberate exercise in accountability. He helped neighbors, mentored children, and sought opportunities to repair the subtle damages he had inflicted upon the lives around him. And slowly, imperceptibly, the community began to accept him not as a son who had failed, but as a man striving to reconcile with the past. Late at night, alone, in his modest apartment, Darren would read Mara's letter once more. The words resonated with a growing depth. Live with this, make it count for something. Start by forgiving others if you cannot forgive yourself. He understood now that redemption was not about erasing mistakes, but about learning from them, bearing their weight with dignity, and channeling their lessons into acts of constructive love. In the quiet, he imagined Mara in her rocking chair, smiling faintly, observing from a distance, and for the first time, he felt as if he were doing something that mattered not for fame, not for reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The chapter ends with Darren looking out over the neighborhood from a small rooftop. The sun sets in fiery oranges and deep purples, casting long shadows over familiar streets. He thinks of Mara, of the yellow envelope, of the life he had nearly lost, and for the first time in decades, he feels a sense of purpose, a fragile but undeniable hope, and a commitment to live differently. The path is still long, still uncertain, but he is no longer running. He is walking, and walking, he knows, is the first step toward redemption. The first light of dawn crept over South Central, and Darren was already awake. He had not slept much, his mind preoccupied with the encounters he knew he could no longer avoid. Each person he had wronged, friends, colleagues, neighbors, even strangers, was a living reminder that redemption demanded not only action but confrontation. He had spent weeks rebuilding, helping quietly, and learning humility. But he knew this was the moment where avoidance would no longer suffice. With a deep breath, he stepped out of his modest apartment. The streets were beginning to stir. Vendors unpacked their goods, children ran to school, and the neighborhood seemed unaware of the personal reckoning about to unfold. Darren's heart pounded. The yellow envelope Mara had left remained tucked under his arm, a talisman of lessons learned and guidance offered. It was time to face the consequences of his past choices. His first stop was a small corner store where, years ago, he had used false documentation to siphon money from his mother's account. The owner, a stout man with deep-set eyes named Mr. Alvarez, was arranging cans of beans on the shelf. Darren's approach made him tense, his steps deliberate. "Mr. Alvarez," Darren began, his voice low and steady, "I'm here to take responsibility for what I did. I know it affected you, and I want to make it right." The man looked up, eyes narrowing at first, then softening. "Darren, I've heard about what happened. Didn't think you'd have the courage to come back." Darren handed him an envelope filled with repayment and a note expressing sincere apology. The man took it slowly, reading the words aloud in a voice tinged with disbelief. "You mean this?" he asked, and Darren nodded. Tears welled in Mr. Alvarez's eyes. "You're trying, that's something." For the first time in decades, Darren felt a subtle release, as though a weight he had carried for years was shifting. He understood then that redemption was not merely about paying debts, it was about acknowledgement, humility, and the willingness to stand in discomfort before those he had wronged. Next, Darren visited Tanya, his estranged former partner. He had delayed this meeting the longest, knowing her anger would be fierce, but avoidance was no longer an option. He found her in a cafe, the same one where their disagreements had escalated into bitterness years before. Tanya's expression hardened as soon as she saw him. I know, Darren said quickly. I know the damage I've done, and I know I have no right to ask for anything. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to acknowledge my mistakes. Tanya leaned back, arms crossed, her dark eyes scanning his face. Do you really think words are enough? She asked, voice cold but measured. Do you even know what you've taken from me, from everyone around you? Darren swallowed hard. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make amends however I can. I've spent months reflecting on my actions, volunteering, helping where I can. I'm here to face what I did, not to escape it. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Finally, Tanya exhaled sharply, letting a crack appear in her armor. You're different, I see that. Maybe you're finally willing to carry the weight. Don't expect me to forget, but I see effort that counts for something. Darren left the cafe feeling a small but profound sense of relief. The confrontation had been painful, yet necessary. His past could no longer control him. He could only navigate its consequences with honesty. Throughout the week, Darren sought out others affected by his actions, colleagues he had manipulated, friends he had neglected, even distant relatives who had suffered because of his greed. Each meeting was challenging. Some met him with anger, some with disbelief, some with cautious curiosity. In each encounter, Darren offered transparency and restitution where possible. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing the weight of others' experiences, letting it temper his ego, and shaping his sense of moral responsibility. One evening, he visited a community center where he had once ignored local initiatives in pursuit of personal gain. The center was filled with children learning art, music, and computer skills programs he had previously disdained as trivial. He approached the director, an energetic woman named Marisol, and humbly asked how he could contribute. She studied him for a long moment before replying, "If you truly mean it, your help will speak louder than your words." He spent the next weeks tutoring children in math and reading, assisting in painting murals, repairing broken furniture, and even organizing small community events. With each task, Darren felt the heavy guilt lighten slightly, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. Mara's words echoed in his mind. Redemption is action, not words. Here, action was tangible, visible, and meaningful. Yet the process was not without internal struggle. Each evening, Darren returned home, exhausted, haunted by flashes of his past arrogance and the deep shame of failure. Sometimes, he sat in his apartment staring at the yellow envelope, the photos of his childhood, and Mara's final letter. He reread her words again and again, internalizing the principle that true redemption demanded persistence, courage, and self-forgiveness. He realized that while external restitution was critical, the hardest work was internal. Facing the echoes of his own failings required honesty that cut sharper than any confrontation. Yet, as days turned to weeks, the internal struggle began to coalesce into a steady rhythm of accountability and self-awareness. He learned to tolerate discomfort without fleeing, to act with integrity even when unobserved, and to embrace humility as a guiding force. Community perceptions slowly began to shift. Children greeted him warmly, now seeing him as a mentor rather than a distant figure of wealth and neglect. Neighbors offered smiles and small conversations, sensing the subtle transformation in the man who had once been lost. Even those who had initially rejected him outright began to acknowledge his efforts, if only quietly. Redemption, Darren discovered, was not about erasing past mistakes. It was about living honorably in the shadow of them. One night, Darren returned to Mara's apartment, now filled with flowers left by neighbors in her honor. He knelt before the rocking chair, imagining her presence, and spoke aloud. "I've tried to live the life you would be proud of, not perfectly, not without missteps, but with purpose. I hope you can see that." He then opened the yellow envelope and took out the photographs. The youngest version of himself stared back, eyes wide with innocence and trust. Darren felt a surge of both sorrow and determination. He understood that the child in the photo represented not just lost time, but also the potential for growth, healing, and transformation. It was a tangible reminder that redemption was not about erasing history, but about shaping the future. Weeks later, the neighborhood gathered for a small memorial event to honor Mara's legacy. Children recited poems, neighbors shared stories, and Darren contributed quietly, facilitating tasks and offering guidance. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging and acceptance, of fragile but undeniable recognition from those around him that his efforts were real, and that change was possible, As the event concluded, Darren stood alone for a moment, looking up at the sky. He whispered, "I am still learning. I am still trying. But I am here." In the wind that rustled the leaves, he imagined Mara smiling, approving silently, her presence invisible yet profoundly felt. The chapter closes with Darren walking through the streets at night, the city lights flickering over familiar buildings, the echoes of laughter and life surrounding him. Each step is deliberate, grounded in the lessons of accountability, humility, and action. The yellow envelope remains with him, a sacred reminder of the journey he began and the promise of continued transformation. He understood now that redemption was not a destination, but a daily practice, a life lived consciously, thoughtfully, and with unwavering attention to the consequences of one's actions. And as he walks through the night, Darren feels, for the first time, that he is finally moving in the right direction. The sun rose slowly over the city, spilling golden light across rooftops and streets. For Darren, the morning felt different. He had slept well for the first time in years, a deep exhaustion that carried a sense of completion rather than anxiety. Mara's legacy had guided him, her lessons embedded into his every action, and the yellow envelope he carried everywhere reminded him daily of what he had lost and what he still could recover. He left his apartment, not with a sense of obligation, but with purpose. Today, he would visit the hospital where Mara had spent her final days, a symbolic act, for she was no longer there. But her spirit lingered in the community, in the lives she had touched, in the silence she had left behind. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and muted conversation, but Darren was focused on the memory rather than the surroundings. He walked slowly down the corridors, past patients and nurses, letting the hum of life and recovery wash over him. He paused in front of the small chapel where Mara had once prayed. For a long time, he stood silently, imagining her seated in her rocking chair, holding her red notebook, writing her final words. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I did my best, Mara. I hope you can see me now." In that quiet, he felt a warmth as if she were nodding, approving silently. For the first time, he realized that Mara's presence had never been about control or judgment. It was about guidance, love expressed through boundaries, lessons taught through courage and dignity. After leaving the hospital, Darren returned to the community center. The children greeted him with smiles, some running into his arms, others handing him drawings and small gifts. Each interaction was a reminder of the ripple effect Mara had created and of the potential Darren had to continue her work. He helped organize a small workshop, teaching art, reading, and problem-solving skills. Unlike before, he was not performing to impress anyone. He was present, genuinely engaged, and attentive to each child's needs. One young girl, about 10 years old, approached him with a drawing. It depicted a woman with a warm smile, surrounded by children and flowers, with the words, "She believed in us, and we believe in you too." Darren felt a lump in his throat. Tears threatened, but he held them back, choosing instead to nod and smile. Mara's spirit lived on, not only in memory but in action. He understood that redemption was not just personal, it was communal, shared across the lives one touched. In the afternoon, Darren visited his estranged relatives, seeking reconciliation. Many were skeptical at first, their memories of past betrayals still sharp. But Darren approached each conversation with humility, listening more than speaking, acknowledging mistakes without excuses, and offering restitution wherever possible. Slowly, walls began to crumble. Some family members allowed themselves to cry openly, others offered cautious smiles. For the first time, Darren experienced the fragile beauty of rebuilding trust, understanding that forgiveness, even partial, was a powerful balm for the soul. He returned home that evening, exhausted yet lighter than he had felt in decades. The apartment was quiet, the streets outside dimly lit, but the sense of peace that settled over him was profound. He took out Mara's yellow envelope and read her final letter once more. "Love is not demanded, it is given. If you have learned that, then you are not lost anymore." He reflected on those words, realizing he had finally internalized the essence of her teaching. He was not only seeking forgiveness from others, but had begun the deeper work of forgiving himself. Days turned into weeks, and Darren continued his efforts. He helped organize community events, mentored troubled youth, and volunteered in local initiatives. Each action was a small act of restitution, a testament to the lessons Mara had imparted. The community's perception of him shifted further from suspicion to cautious respect, from skepticism to recognition. Yet Darren understood that redemption was not about accolades, it was about consistently choosing the right path, even when no one was watching. One evening, as he walked through a quiet park, he encountered an elderly woman who reminded him of Mara. She smiled at him, her eyes warm. "You're making a difference," she said softly. Darren nodded, unable to find words. In that moment, he realized that Mara's influence was eternal. Not because of her presence, but because of the change she inspired in him. Every act of kindness, every gesture of honesty, every moment of courage was a continuation of her legacy. The pinnacle of Darren's reconciliation came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while walking through a local market, he saw a mother struggling with her children, groceries spilling onto the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Darren stepped forward, helping carry bags and calm the children. The mother looked at him with gratitude, and he felt an unexpected surge of emotion, pride, mixed with humility. He realized that small acts of compassion could heal wounds left by a lifetime of mistakes. He was no longer defined by his past. He was defined by his actions in the present. Weeks later, Darren organized a small memorial in Mara's honor at the community center. Children performed songs she loved. Neighbors shared stories of her courage, and Darren spoke briefly, his voice steady but emotional. "Mara taught me the value of love, responsibility, and dignity," he said. "She showed me that even in the face of failure, it is possible to change, to give, and to forgive. I dedicate my efforts to her memory, and to all of you who continue to believe in second chances." The audience, a mix of children, neighbors, and friends, applauded softly. Darren felt a deep sense of closure, a harmony between past and present, loss and redemption. Mara's lessons had not only reshaped his life but had become a guiding principle for an entire community. As night fell, Darren returned home, carrying Mara's red notebook and the yellow envelope. He placed them carefully on a shelf, alongside the photographs of his childhood. He sat in the rocking chair she once occupied, feeling the weight of her presence, her guidance, and her unwavering love. Tears rolled down his cheeks, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. He had faced the shadows of his past, confronted the consequences of his actions, and embraced the path of redemption. In the silence, he whispered, "Thank you, Mara. I will honor your life, your lessons, and your love, every single day." The wind rustled through the trees outside, carrying a sense of peace and finality. Darren finally understood. Redemption was not about erasing mistakes, but living with integrity, love, and purpose. Mara's life had given him a second chance, and he would not waste it. The chapter ends. The story closes with Darren stepping outside into the night, the city lights twinkling around him. Each step forward is deliberate, each breath a reminder of the lessons learned. He has faced the past, embraced accountability, and found peace not through punishment, but through action, compassion, and enduring love. Mara's spirit, though gone, lives on in him, a guiding force for the rest of his life.